Hey gang, hope you're all well, and I hope you enjoyed these stories about crazy neighbors. I think we all have them, and heck, I've had my share myself. Anywho, I'm looking for your stories, especially any scary Christmas or New Year's Eve stories you might be willing to share. I read them all no matter what. Send anything to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com, and you will definitely hear it in an upcoming edition. So, let's get after it. Here are some crazy stories about some pretty crazy neighbors. Let's begin. Obsessed Woman, submitted by Woozy. When my husband and I first got together, we lived in an apartment that was basically 4 units. The 3 sets of neighbors were nice at first, and, well, their young family was always nice, and the elderly man, I'll call him Ralph, was nice too. But the woman who lived next door, let's call her Sharon, began being obsessed with my then-fiancé. We would grill in the backyard, and my now-husband had made arrangements with the landlord to take care of things around the 4 units, as he was in construction. We got a break on the rent because of it. Every once in a while, Jim would get a call to help Ralph with a plumbing issue or something, or the family would have an issue with something else. But once Sharon found out my man could fix things, she started calling him up for the smallest things. Jim is a great guy and always went over to help with a positive attitude no matter how dumb the issue was. And I'm talking dumb, like, I can't get the window open, or how do I stop the toilet from running? Jiggle the handle, you idiot. Let me describe this woman. She was tall and thin and was a chain smoker. She wasn't ugly, but she wasn't a come-hither beauty either. I do remember she had red hair, and Jim would always say that her hair was on fire when something stupid happened and she would call. She took to dressing in really slutty outfits around the place and yard when we were outside, as if she was going to lure him away from me. Yeah, I'm sure, Sharon. One Saturday night we were grilling in the back and just sitting in our yard furniture enjoying the night when we heard her calling from her back window that there was something wrong with her shower, or something dumb. So Jim went over. He came out after about 5 minutes shaking his head. I asked him what was up, and he just said that Sharon was getting a little out there. She was not near her bathroom when Jim went in, and he said she was wearing a skimpy nightgown and was laying on the couch in some kind of suggestive way. Jim said he walked right past her to check on her shower upstairs, and she followed him. When he saw there was nothing wrong, she had blocked the door and told him that he needed to pay a toll to leave, and the toll was to give her a hug. He said, "I don't think so," and gently pushed past her and then came back out to me. And so far this is tame. Things got crazier. Not long after that incident, Jim left for work and she had gotten in the cab of his truck and he never saw her. He only found out when she started to rub his shoulders from behind and he almost drove off the road. Like a total pro, Jim stayed calm and simply drove back home and told her she needed to get out of his truck. She did and went inside. And later that day she came out to talk to me and asked me how good Jim was in bed, and I put my foot down and told her that it was none of her business and that I'd appreciate it if she backed off. Sharon went back in her place after telling me I needed to relax. Later we were going on a vacation and Ralph was going to watch our place and feed our birds and stuff. I don't know what happened, but he must have left the door unlocked once or twice because we do know Sharon had gotten into our place while we were gone. How do we know? She left little notes in our bedroom talking about how we should all get together and the things she wanted to do to Jim and me in bed. This time we did call the police, but they told us to just try to work it out and that she didn't sound like a serious threat. Yeah, thanks. One of the officers did go over to speak with Sharon, but she put on the charm and nothing really happened. We changed the locks, gave a key to the young guy up front, and didn't rely on Ralph anymore. Sharon still called about things, but it became less frequent, until the final thing before we got her evicted and arrested. Once again, she called for Jim for something dumb, but this time when he went to look at her clothes dryer, she got up behind him with a knife and told him that he was going to please her no matter what. I'm not making this up. She wanted him to get on his knees and have oral sex. According to my hubby, he turned around, saw the knife in her hand, and got on his knees. She opened up her stupid nightgown, and that's when Jim noticed it wasn't a real knife, just a convincing-looking rubber thing. He punched her in the hand and then socked her in the gut and ran out of the basement. She tried chasing him and then stood at our back door banging on it and screaming that she loved him and that he was supposed to get her pregnant and take her away. I called the police again. Jim called the landlord, and everyone got there in time to see Sharon screaming and ranting in the backyard. The police took her away. Jim told them what had happened and told the landlord he was pissed off that he had never done anything about Sharon and how much of an asshole he thought he was. We packed up some things and left that night and found a new place in a couple of days. The landlord apologized to us and let us out of our lease and then let us stay rent-free for the rest of the month until we could move into our new place. He never took Sharon seriously or our complaints, but then all of a sudden he did. We moved out again not long after that and got out of California. I have no idea what happened to that woman, but she was crazy and obsessed with my man. I still joke when I see someone doing something crazy that they're pulling a Sharon. The Weirdo Gang by G Money Mommy. The year before we were married, my husband and I found this awesome penthouse studio apartment in this old building downtown. It was our first apartment when we were stoked. Not long into living there, strange people started coming out of the woodwork though. We ended up finding out a lot about these people from our landlord when my husband decided to do a documentary about the building. All the apartments except ours and the other penthouse were low income for single adults, and there were some really interesting stories. Anyway, onto the creepiness. Ken lived right below us. He showed up at our door one night with a cooked frozen pizza. He told us he was a chef and had made it for us. We said thanks, and then we threw it out. He came back about an hour later and told us that he heard some Mexicans outside fighting and need to go up onto our roof to look at them. He told us to call the cops or he was going to go out and stab them. There was no one outside fighting. A few nights later, we come home to a DiGiorno pizza still in the box sitting outside of our door. Again, we threw it away. That night, the cops showed up at our house at 4 a.m. in response to a domestic disturbance. We had both been sleeping for about 5 hours. We got questioned by the cops and they left. A few days later, we found this note outside our door. And yes, I saved it, and this is it verbatim. Hey bro, the loud music has got to stop, as well as you're fighting with your wife. I will notify Bob and call the police. You have a problem. Why are you so angry? What are you on? Crystal meth? You have a lot to live for. You are young. You have a film career. Don't blow it, dude. I hope you enjoyed the pizza I left you. Yeah, a little weird. Then there was Ernie, a 120-year-old man, probably only 85, but he wore shopping bags for socks and would always mumble things when he walked by you, like typical Mormon tricks cutting down the Christmas trees. Bush is the only one who can get all the channels. Everyone else just comes up short. I know the movies that you like to watch. Again, pretty creepy. And there was Rodney, who always peered out his door at us as we walked by. Some days he knew us, others he thought we were the pizza delivery guy. Those were the ones that creeped me out the most. There were lots of other crazy stories too, and I guess Rodney and Ernie were pretty harmless. But if I see Ken around town, I still get creeped out. Maniac Across the Street. Submitted by Tello Funky One. This guy across the street from me was a fucking maniac. I had been working my job and had saved enough money to buy a house in a reasonably priced neighborhood in a suburb of Spokane, Washington. It was a nice place that I was going to fix up and likely sell after a few years. And that was the plan, and that's what I did. My next-door neighbors were a young couple that I became friends with, and on the other side was a widow who was also very nice. The guy across the street? Holy shit. Certifiable. Joe, the guy next door, warned me about him right away. He said he mainly stuck to himself, but would have outbursts on people if they did things he didn't like. For example, Joe said one time he was raking leaves and putting them into those paper yard bags, and Frank, the guy across the street, that's what I'll call him, came running out of his house screaming that he couldn't use Home Depot bags because Home Depot didn't support the war effort, and then started kicking the full bags all over the place, spilling the leaves back onto Joe's grass. And then he turned and went home. Another time, Joe's wife had a party with her girlfriends, and one of them parked in the street in front of Frank's house. He came over screaming that no one was allowed to park there, and for whatever bitch parked there had to move her car now. Instead, they called the police, who came out and talked to him. My first experience wouldn't come for a couple of months. I was working on my front porch railing one Sunday morning, and Frank came over and yelled at me for working on a Sunday. I tried to be nice, but he just kept screaming Bible passages at me until I told him he needed to stop yelling, calm down, and get off my property. So then he just went and stood in the street, saying it was a free country, and went back to screaming stuff about the Bible. I paid him no mind and went back to work. A couple of weeks later, I bought my first puppy and was playing with her on my lawn with Joe and his wife. Frank came out onto his sidewalk and yelled to me that if my dog barks at all, he's going to shoot it. I told him to fuck off, and if he so much as touched my dog, I'd break his face for him. He left. Then he started harassing the old lady next door, just yelling rude shit like her husband died early because she was evil and he was a God-fearing man and God didn't want her to be near him. I mean, really vile, crazy crap like that. One night, I was in my backyard talking to her over our fence, and Joe came out through my gate telling me that things were getting crazy. He said Frank had put up a Nazi flag and was sitting on his porch cleaning his guns. He had pointed his finger at Joe while Joe was in his front yard, and Frank yelled bang. He thought we should start documenting everything going forward, and I agreed, and that's exactly what we did. One night, at about 3 in the morning, my doorbell rang, and there's Frank at the front door wearing nothing but boxer shorts, boots, and a gun on his hip. He told me to shut my dog up, who was asleep by the way, and if I didn't shut my dog up, he was going to call the police. I said, "Hey asshole, guess what? I'll take care of that for you," and slammed the door in his face. I called the cops, and he told them he was just trying to help me and that he thought my dog was locked out accidentally and was barking to get in. They didn't buy it, and they warned him again. Things progressed. Frank took to putting nails in our driveways and front yards, but we could never catch him in the act, but we knew it was him. He would put his garbage on our side of the street, and he would yell at us every time we came home from work or wherever we were coming back from. Finally, the last straw. Joe was helping me load some timber from my house early one Saturday morning, and out came Frank screaming that we were violating the noise curfew. Joe finally said, "Fuck you," and Frank ran at him and pushed him. Joe tripped and clipped his head on my truck's bumper. And that's when I went into action and swung a huge haymaker and blasted Frank in the side of his fat face, and he fell down in a heap. I immediately called the police while he lay there, and they came out and arrested him after they heard what happened. After that, we didn't see him that much, and I ended up moving a couple of years later, as was my plan. The day I was moving out, he was standing in his picture window holding a shotgun and was just staring at me as I loaded up my U-Haul. Joe was helping me move, and as we pulled out of the driveway, Frank ran out and screamed, "You're lucky you're leaving." Joe moved out not too long after me, but I think that nice lady next door is still there. Frank was a fucking maniac. I've never met anyone like that, and hopefully never will again. Not really who they seem to be. When we were poor grad students, the first place my husband and I lived kept having stuff stolen off the porch, and he couldn't order anything as he'd never get it. So when I joined him, we found another apartment in a different neighborhood, and on Saturday, the neighbors got dressed up and walked to the local synagogue. I thought I'd done a wonderful job of picking a good neighborhood. We had synagogue-going neighbors, and not thieves. At some point, my husband started pointing out char marks. We had put in some wood to replace a window pane so that the dryer vent hole could be cut, and it was charred. I mean, there were scorch marks everywhere, and they were elsewhere too. Then there was the day that our mail was singed. I was in a demanding graduate program, so I never really thought about the fact that someone was trying to light fires around our house. Then, one day, it was the dry grass in the backyard. Thankfully, it wasn't a big fire, but we didn't have hoses, and I wasn't having much success putting it out, so we had to call the fire department, and they came out pretty quickly and took care of it. After an investigation, they told us the 10-year-old kid next door, the one whose family always walked to the synagogue every Saturday looking like the poster family for family values, he had been suspected of lighting several fires. They were considering what steps to take to deal with him. This was all happening at the end of our schooling, and we were moving in less than a month, so how all of that ended, I don't know. So, creepy little kid next door who was trying to set us on fire? Let's not meet. My Creepy Neighbors by Chels Ocean 12. Recently, I've encountered some very interesting things happening with the neighbors. First, my neighbors are always watching through their curtains at my boyfriend and I. A couple of months ago, I had some pretty major surgery, and their mentally handicapped daughter, who is actually in her 40s or 50s, whom I've never even met, started coming onto our property at like 5 a.m. and jumping out of the bushes, scaring my boyfriend when he leaves for work. She would ask him if he has a message for her and where he comes from. And then he asked her who she is, and she says, "You don't know?" She would always be barefoot, too. One day, her father watched from the window as this was happening and didn't even try to explain to us what was going on. The father is this grumpy old man, and the wife is a mute who hasn't spoken in like 30 years, and they have 2 mentally handicapped children who are older. I have yet to see or meet the son. So, back to the daughter. She came over the day that my boyfriend brought me home from the hospital and was asking a bunch of questions, so I called the police on her because I was done with her doing this, and the dad wasn't doing anything about it. The police talked to the father and everything seemed sorted out. Well, then the next morning my boyfriend started his truck for work, and the father came out yelling at him about his truck being too loud, and it just got crazy. So fast forward to a month later. I get a text from the landlord saying the neighbors are complaining the dogs are always barking and that we are bothering them. In my head I went, what the fuck? So I just let it sit for a bit, and I knew our dogs weren't the ones always barking. Then I started noticing that no matter what my boyfriend and I were doing, the neighbors were always spying through their curtains, or through a window, but standing back far enough to where we could barely see them, but we could feel them watching. About a week ago, the old man came out and started asking about my ex-husband and why I wasn't at work and so on, but really angry about it. I answered politely and went about scraping the ice off my windshield. He went back inside but watched me through the curtains the whole time until I drove away. This has continued, and every time I go outside, either he or his wife go outside and pretend they're doing something and just watch me and my boyfriend. I saw them putting a camera phone out of the window yesterday when we were packing up our trailer to move. I mean, what the fuck am I supposed to do? I'm already moving out, and I explained to the landlord what's happening. I mean, these people seriously freak me out. The Old House, submitted by CandleDoodle5. I grew up in a rural part of New Brunswick called North Forks. It was just my parents, me, and my brother Andy. When we were growing up, there wasn't a lot to do, and most of our friends lived across the river in Chipman. It was cool living out in the sticks, but we had to entertain ourselves a whole lot outside of Nintendo and the few channels we got on TV. My dad wouldn't pay for cable. We did a lot of hunting and fishing even at an early age, and of course we spent a ton of time in the woods that surrounded our house. Our nearest neighbor was something like a mile or so away, and it was just an old couple that would stop by our house once in a while. When I was in my teens, I frequently went over to check on them, and they spent many holidays with us, too. The old man, let's call him Bart for this, plays a role in my story. Between our 2 properties, there was an old abandoned house that I think was used by a timber company long ago where workers all crashed there between shifts. And if I recall correctly, that's what Bart told me. Anyway, my brother and I would pass by it frequently on our travels in the woods, and we always thought it was haunted. It was so bizarre, just down this dirt path in the middle of nowhere, if you get my meaning. Once in a while we would peer into the windows and just see some old furniture and junk, but we never went in to look around. My dad was super against that and told us to stay away from there because we could get hurt as it was such an old place. It was kind of falling apart, so we listened to Dad. When I was about 15 and Andy was 13, we went out to shoot our BB guns with a friend I'll call Chuck. we weren't allowed to go out with our rifles without my dad. Chuck was visiting from out of town and spending the weekend with us, so we were looking for a good time. We walked around the woods for a good while and of course came across the house. Chuck asked if we ever went inside, and I said no, and that it was probably dangerous to be in there. He just laughed and told us to follow him. We got up to it and looked in the windows like we always did, and then walked around to the back of the house. Chuck went up to the door and tried the handle. It turned, and the door opened. "Come on," he said. I stood there with Andy and said, "I don't think this is a good idea." He called us chickens and went inside. I told Andy to stay put and went in after Chuck, clutching my little BB gun. The first thing I noticed was that it smelled terrible. Not that musty old house smell, but like something was dead and rotting. I will never forget that smell. I've come across lots of dead animals in the woods, and it was 10 times worse than that. I saw Chuck heading for the stairs to go up, and I went over to him to tell him that we should just get out of there. He didn't listen and went upstairs, and I heard him walking around and stopping every now and again. I looked around the downstairs area, and the smell got worse near a door in the kitchen. Chuck came down and told me there was nothing up there, and he also mentioned the smell. I told him let's go, but instead he went to the door in the kitchen and opened it, and we both looked inside. It was a staircase to the basement, and it was really dark and creepy looking. He said, "Come on," again, and started down. I stood at the top of the steps as he disappeared around a corner at the base of the stairs, and then I heard him shout for me to come down and see something. I wavered a bit, but then started after him. It was a dirt floor basement, and there were no windows to the outside, but my eyes adjusted to the dark, and I could make out Chuck standing across the room looking at something. The smell was even worse down here, and I just wanted to get out. "Hey!" called out Chuck. "Come and look at this!" That's when I noticed Chuck was calling me from another part of the basement. It took me a minute to register what was happening, but the figure I was looking at didn't move. It just stood there. "Chuck! There's someone down here!" I shouted. "What?" he yelled back. The figure sort of shuffled towards us slowly and turned on a flashlight. From the brief piece of light I got before bailing out of there and running up the steps, I could see a dirty older man in tattered clothes. There was a stained mattress on the floor, and next to that a chair with another figure, although it was clear that that one was dead and the cause of this smell. Chuck bumped into me, and we ran up the stairs to hear Andy screaming for us outside. We flew out the door, and Andy was screaming about, "The men! There's men going into the house!" We all just started running and running until we were almost back to our house, looking over our shoulders the whole time. No one was ever following us, thank God. When we did get home, I ran to tell my dad and Bart, who were sitting in our kitchen drinking coffee and talking. I told them what I saw, and Bart's eyes widened. Dad yelled, "I thought I told you to stay out of that goddamn house," and pounded his hand on the table. He stopped yelling and asked me again what I saw. Chuck verified everything, and we just stood there as Dad and Bart looked at one another. "Are you sure that's what you saw?" he asked. "Yes," we both said at the same time. Dad went to the phone and called the authorities, and they asked to meet him out at the house and for me and Chuck to be there too, when he told them about what we saw. The 4 of us drove out through the dirt road and got to the house. There were 2 RCMP guys standing at the door knocking on it. No one answered, so they went around back and went in the same way we did. They were just going to do a welfare check. They were inside for a while and finally came out with the guy that we saw in the basement. He was really skinny and disheveled and looked like he hadn't washed in years. There was something very off with him, though. He just looked strange. It's hard to explain. The 2 other guys were not in the house. So, the reason my dad didn't want us over here was because there was a family that had been squatting here for years, and that they, as Bart said, weren't all there. The other person I saw in the basement was the mother, who had passed away weeks before, and these sons just kept her body in the basement. All 3 brothers lived down there next to her putrefying body. Don't get me wrong, they weren't like mutated hillbillies or anything, but they were more mentally challenged, and it was actually kind of sad. The two brothers were eventually found too, and my dad explained that a lot of people had bad run-ins with them in and around town, and that they were kind of dangerous, and another reason to not be around that house. I don't really know what happened to them, but I do know that they tore the house down a few years ago. It's been like 20 years since this happened, but that smell in the place was so putrid it will never leave my mind. We didn't get into trouble for being out there, and my dad now says it's probably a good thing that we stumbled into that situation. It really wasn't safe for them to be living there with a dead body and doing God knows what else. Thanks for listening, gang. Hope you like this edition of Some Crazy Neighbor Stories. Please like, share, and subscribe, and be sure to send me any scary story that you'd like to share. unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I pride myself on the content I share, and it's because of the people who send things in I am able to give stories that are not found anywhere else. Follow me on social media, and I'll admit I've been slacking on my posting there, but you're still welcome to it. And if you care to, throw me a tip on my Patreon page. There are links to everything in the description below. Stay cool, be excellent to one another, and remember, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.